A judge in Miami today followed the jury's recommendation and sentenced Theodore Bundy to die in the electric chair.
Bundy is scheduled to die in Florida's electric chair tomorrow morning at 7. There may still be some last-ditch legal maneuvers that could cause yet another delay in the execution, including an appeal for clemency to the governor of Florida.
Bundy is the 136th person under death sentence in Florida. Ed Rabel reports.
In the quiet corners of history, few figures evoke as much morbid fascination as Theodore Robert Bundy, better known as Ted Bundy. Join us today as we explore the enigmatic world of one of the most infamous serial killers of the 20th century. Our journey begins in the serene landscapes of the Pacific Northwest. These tranquil woods would later become the backdrop for some of the most horrifying acts of violence the world has ever seen. Bundy, a man whose charming facade concealed an abyss of darkness, walked these very trails. But what drove him to commit such heinous acts? Ted Bundy was an enigma. Handsome, intelligent, and charismatic, he didn't fit the stereotype of a cold-blooded killer. It's this very paradox that continues to captivate our imagination. His method of luring victims was a sinister mix of charm and deception. Bundy would typically approach a woman in a public place, often pretending to be in need of help, sometimes faking an injury. He would manipulate his unsuspecting victims into a false sense of security and then lead them to a secluded location. There, he would launch his horrific attack, beating his victims into unconsciousness, handcuffing them, and then transporting them to another location where they would endure sexual assault and tragically meet their end. What's truly unsettling is that Bundy's cruelty didn't end with the murder. He would return to the lifeless bodies of those he had abducted, engaging in disturbing acts on their remains until wildlife had taken their toll. The fact that he kept severed heads from at least 12 victims as trophies in his apartment speaks volumes about the depths of his cruelty. Bundy's brutality knew no bounds. On several occasions, he would invade homes in the dead of night, subjecting his victims to merciless assaults, maiming, strangulation, and sexual abuse while they slept. In 1975, Bundy's reign of terror was temporarily halted when he was arrested in Utah and imprisoned for aggravated kidnapping and attempted criminal assault. This marked the beginning of his connection to a growing list of unsolved homicides across several states. During his time in custody, Bundy orchestrated 2 daring escapes and continued his murderous spree in Florida, committing 3 more homicides. His reign of terror finally came to an end in 1978 when he was recaptured. Biographer Ann Rule depicted Bundy as a sadistic sociopath who took pleasure in inflicting pain on others, maintaining control over his victims even beyond their deaths. Bundy himself once described himself as the most cold-hearted son of a bitch you'll ever meet, a description that attorney Polly Nelson, a member of his final defense team, wholeheartedly agreed with, asserting that Ted was the embodiment of heartless evil. Once upon a time, in the chilly town of Burlington, Vermont, on a November morning in 1946, a baby named Theodore Robert Cowell came into the world. His birth occurred at the Elizabeth Lund Home for Unwed Mothers, with Eleanor Louise Cowell as his mother. The circumstances surrounding his birth were shrouded in mystery. His original birth certificate suggested that a man named Lloyd Marshall, a salesman and U.S. Air Force veteran, might be his father. However, another copy left his father's identity unknown. Louise, Ted's mother, claimed to have been involved with a war veteran named Jack Worthington, who vanished when he learned about her pregnancy. The uncertainty about Ted's father continued, with several men named John Worthington and Lloyd Marshall living nearby during Louise's pregnancy, leading to suspicions of possible incest. However, a DNA test, as revealed by psychiatrist Dorothy Otno Lewis in the 2020 documentary Crazy, Not Insane, debunked this theory, confirming that Ted was not a result of incest. For the first 3 years of Ted's life, he lived in Roxborough, Pennsylvania, under the care of his maternal grandparents, Samuel Knecht Cowell and Eleanor Miriam Longstreet. They raised him as their own child to shield the family from the social stigma of unwed motherhood. The family maintained the facade that Ted's mother was his older sister, and his grandparents were his parents. Ted would later recall the moment he discovered the truth, though his accounts varied. He shared with a girlfriend that a cousin had exposed the secret by showing him a copy of his birth certificate, referring to him as a bastard. In contrast, he told biographers Stephen Michaud and Hugh Ainsworth that he had unearthed the certificate himself. Biographer Ann Rule, who knew Bundy personally, believed that he didn't uncover the truth until 1969 when he located his original birth record in Vermont. Ted held a deep-seated resentment toward his mother for not disclosing the identity of his real father and for leaving him to uncover the truth on his own. Disturbing behavior manifested in Bundy even at an early age. His aunt, Julia Cowell, remembered an incident in which young Ted surrounded her with knives from the kitchen as she woke from a nap, a chilling sight. Despite these tumultuous family secrets, Ted occasionally spoke fondly of his grandparents, even expressing admiration for his grandfather. Nevertheless, in 1987, he and other family members revealed a different, darker side to Samuel, depicting him as a tyrannical bully who mistreated his wife and animals, harbored racist and xenophobic views, and had a violent temper. Some even suggested he spoke to unseen entities. These accounts, however, came under scrutiny in recent investigations, with some locals recalling Samuel as a fine man and disputing the allegations against him. As for Ted's grandmother, she was portrayed as a timid and obedient woman who battled depression and resorted to electroconvulsive therapy while becoming increasingly reclusive toward the end of her life. However, Bundy's cousin asserted that their mother's condition was not due to mental illness, but was the result of a stroke caused by her weight gain. Audrey Cowell, Louise's sister, supported this view. In 1950, Louise changed her surname from Cowell to Nelson, and, under the influence of family members, left Philadelphia with Ted to reside with cousins Alan and Jane Scott in Tacoma, Washington. It was in Tacoma that Louise met Johnny Culpepper Bundy, a hospital cook, at an adult singles event held at Tacoma's First Methodist Church in 1951. They married that same year, and Johnny formally adopted Ted. Johnny and Louise went on to have 4 children of their own, but Ted remained emotionally distant from his adoptive father. He complained to a girlfriend about Johnny not being his real father, criticizing his intelligence and financial status. Ted's recollections of his time in Tacoma varied as he grew older. He described wandering the neighborhood, sifting through trash cans in search of pictures of naked women. In contrast, he told attorney and author Polly Nelson that he read detective magazines and crime novels, particularly those involving sexual violence, particularly when the stories were illustrated with pictures of dead or maimed women. In a letter to Ann Rule, he denied ever reading fact detective magazines. He asserted that he never, ever read fact detective magazines, and shuddered at the thought that anyone would. Ted also confessed to consuming alcohol and prowling the community late at night, looking for undraped windows to peer through, or any other voyeuristic opportunities. Ted's neighbor, Sandy Holt, remembered him as a bully who delighted in terrifying others and engaging in acts of animal cruelty, such as hanging stray cats from clotheslines and setting them on fire. He would also lead younger children into the woods to torment and strip them. Ted displayed a violent temper and an inclination to inflict fear and suffering on others. Regarding his social life, Ted Bundy offered conflicting accounts. He explained to journalists Michaud and Ainsworth that he chose to be alone in his adolescence because he struggled to comprehend interpersonal relationships. He felt out of his element in forming friendships, admitting his social ineptitude. Yet, his high school classmates at Woodrow Wilson High School remembered him differently, describing him as well-liked and well-known, far from a social outcast. Bundy's only notable interest was downhill skiing, which he pursued with passion, even resorting to theft and forgery for the required equipment and lift tickets. Despite his adolescent troubles, the details of his 2 arrests on suspicion of burglary and motor vehicle theft at the age of 18 were later expunged from his record, following the customary practice in Washington and other states. After Ted Bundy graduated from high school in 1965, he embarked on his college journey. He started at the University of Puget Sound, UPS, for a year before transferring to the University of Washington, UW, with a focus on studying Chinese. In 1967, his life took a romantic turn when he became involved with a fellow UW student, Diane Edwards. According to Bundy biographies, she was like the woman of his dreams, and he considered her to be the most sophisticated and beautiful person he had ever met. In Bundy's own words, she was the only woman I ever really loved. However, early in 1968, Bundy decided to drop out of college. he took up a series of minimum wage jobs and got involved in politics, volunteering at the Seattle office for Nelson Rockefeller's presidential campaign. He even became the driver and bodyguard for Arthur Fletcher during his campaign for lieutenant governor of Washington state. In the spring of 1968, Diane Edwards graduated and left Washington for San Francisco. Later that year, Bundy visited her after earning a scholarship to study Chinese at Stanford University. In August 1968, Bundy attended the Republican National Convention in Miami. Soon after, Edwards decided to end their relationship, citing Bundy's immaturity and lack of ambition as the reasons. Psychiatrist Dorothy Otno Lewis later considered this breakup as a pivotal moment in his development. Devastated by the separation, Bundy traveled to various places, including Colorado, Arkansas, and Philadelphia, and briefly enrolled at Temple University. It was around early 1969 that Bundy is believed to have visited the Office of Birth Records in Burlington and confirmed his true parentage, according to Ann Rule. Bundy returned to Washington in the fall of 1969, where he met Elizabeth Klopfer, known by several pseudonyms like Meg Anders, Beth Archer, or Liz Kendall. She was a single mother working as a secretary at the UW School of Medicine. Their relationship was tumultuous and continued well beyond Bundy's initial incarceration in Utah in 1976. Bundy played a fatherly role in the life of Klopfer's daughter, Molly, from the time she was 3 years old until she was 10. However, as an adult, Molly would recount instances of Bundy's abusive and inappropriate behavior towards her. In mid-1970, Bundy re-enrolled at UW, this time as a psychology major. He excelled academically, becoming an honor student and earning the respect of his professors. In 1971, he took a job at Seattle's Suicide Hotline Crisis Center, where he worked alongside Ann Rule, a former Seattle police officer and aspiring crime writer. At the time, Rule saw nothing disturbing in Bundy's personality and described him as kind, empathetic, and solicitous. Bundy graduated from UW in 1972 and joined Governor Daniel J. Evans's re-election campaign. Posing as a college student, he shadowed Evans' opponent, former Governor Albert Rossellini, and recorded his speeches for analysis by Evans's team. After Evans was re-elected, Bundy was hired as an assistant to Ross Davis, chairman of the Washington State Republican Party. In early 1973, Bundy, on a trip to California for Republican Party business, rekindled his relationship with Edwards. She was impressed by his transformation into a dedicated and professional individual who seemed poised for a successful legal and political career. During this time, Bundy was still dating Klopfer, with neither woman aware of the other's existence. In the fall of 1973, he enrolled in UPS Law School while continuing to court Edwards, who visited him in Seattle several times, and they even discussed marriage. Bundy introduced her to Davis as his fiancée. However, in January 1974, Bundy abruptly severed all ties with Edwards. She made numerous attempts to reach him, but her calls and letters went unanswered. When she finally reached him by phone, demanding an explanation for his sudden departure, Bundy simply replied that he had no idea what she meant and hung up. She never heard from him again. Bundy later explained that he just wanted to prove to himself that he could have married her. But Edwards believed that his intense courtship had been a carefully planned ruse, designed to make her fall in love with him, just so he could reject her in return. By then, Bundy had started to skip classes at law school, eventually ceasing to attend altogether, coinciding with the disappearance of young women in the Pacific Northwest in April. Washington, Oregon. In the early hours of January 4, 1974, at a time when Ted Bundy had recently ended his relationship with Diane Edwards, he entered the basement apartment of an 18-year-old named Karen Sparks. She was often identified by various names in Bundy literature, such as Joni Lenz, Mary Adams, and Terry Caldwell. Karen, a dancer and student at the University of Washington in Seattle, became the victim of Bundy's brutal attack. He used a metal rod from her bed frame to bludgeon her and then sexually assaulted her with the same rod, causing severe internal injuries and rupturing her bladder. Karen remained unconscious in the hospital for 10 days, and though she survived, she suffered permanent brain damage, resulting in significant vision and hearing loss. On February 1, 1974, in the early morning hours, Bundy broke into the basement room of 21-year-old Linda Ann Healy, a UW undergraduate, who provided morning radio weather reports for skiers. He beat her unconscious, dressed her in blue jeans, a white blouse, and boots, and took her away. Bundy later revealed that he drove Linda to a secluded location, where he raped and murdered her before disposing of her body. Throughout the first half of 1974, young female college students went missing at an alarming rate, roughly one per month. On March 12th, Donna Gail Manson, a 19-year-old student at Evergreen State College in Olympia, mysteriously disappeared. She left her dormitory to attend a jazz concert on campus but never arrived. Bundy admitted to taking Donna's skull to his girlfriend's house after raping and murdering her before burning it in the fireplace out of paranoia and cleanliness. On April 17th, 18-year-old Susan Elaine Rancourt vanished on her way to her dorm room after an evening advisors meeting at Central Washington State College in Ellensburg. Two fellow students reported encounters with a man asking for help with a load of books to his brown or tan Volkswagen Beetle around the time of Susan's disappearance. The streak of disappearances continued on May 6, when 22-year-old Roberta Kathleen Parks left her dormitory at Oregon State University in Corvallis. Bundy claimed he saw her in the cafeteria, persuaded her to accompany him to a bar. He drove her back to Washington, where he sexually assaulted her twice on the way, and eventually killed her. These cases puzzled investigators. The missing women had little in common apart from their similar appearance as young, attractive, white college students with long, middle-parted hair. The disappearances occurred at night, often near construction sites and around midterm or final exams. The victims were wearing slacks or blue jeans when they disappeared, and in many cases, witnesses reported a man with a cast or a sling driving a brown or tan Volkswagen Beetle. On June 1st, Brenda Carol Ball, age 22, went missing after leaving the Flame Tavern in Burien, near Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. Her last known interaction was in the parking lot, where she conversed with a brown-haired man sporting an arm sling. According to Bundy, he took Ball to his residence, where they engaged in what he claimed was a consensual sexual encounter. However, he later admitted to strangling her while she slept, leaving unexplained the severe damage to her skull. In the early hours of June 11th, Jorgan Hawkins, an 18-year-old University of Washington student, disappeared while walking through a well-lit alley connecting her boyfriend's dormitory residence and her sorority house. Despite an exhaustive search by 3 Seattle homicide detectives and a criminalist, no evidence was found. Bundy later disclosed to Keppel that he enticed Hawkins to his car, incapacitated her with a crowbar, handcuffed her, and then drove her to Issaquah, a suburb 20 miles east of Seattle. There, he strangled her and spent the entire night with her body. The following morning, amidst a significant crime scene investigation, Bundy returned to the University of Washington alley. Astonishingly, he located and collected Hawkins's earrings and one of her shoes, which he had left in the adjacent parking lot, before departing unnoticed. Keppel described this act as a feat so brazen that it continues to astonish the police to this day. Bundy admitted to revisiting Hawkins's corpse on 3 occasions. The disturbing series of events culminated on July 14, 1974, when 2 women were abducted from a crowded beach at Lake Sammamish State Park in Issaquah. 4 female witnesses described a man with a left arm in a sling, speaking with an accent, who approached them with a sailboat story, asking for their help. 3 of the women refused, but one went with him as far as his car, where she saw no sailboat and promptly fled. 3 other witnesses saw him approach Janice Ann Ott, a 23-year-old probation caseworker, with the sailboat story, and saw her leave the beach with him. About 4 hours later, 19-year-old Denise Marie Nasland, who was studying to become a computer programmer, went to the restroom and never returned to her picnic. Bundy admitted to his involvement with these 2 women, stating that he forced one to witness the assault and murder of the other. The fear among the population had spread, leading to a sharp decline in young women hitchhiking. Pressure was mounting on law enforcement agencies, but the scarcity of physical evidence was a significant hindrance. At this point, Bundy was working for the Seattle Crime Prevention Advisory Commission and later at the Department of Emergency Services, where he began dating Carol Ann Boone, who would play a significant role in his life in the years to come. As news of the brutal attacks on Karen Sparks and the disappearances of the 6 young women spread through Washington and Oregon, fear gripped the region. Hitchhiking by young women drastically decreased. Law enforcement agencies were under intense pressure, but the lack of substantial physical evidence posed a significant challenge. Reports in newspapers and on television were causing panic among the public. On September 6, 1974, 2 grouse hunters made a gruesome discovery, finding the skeletal remains of Janice Ann Ott and Denise Marie Naslund near a service road in Issaquah. 6 months later, forestry students from Green River Community College discovered the skulls and mandibles of Linda Ann Healy, Susan Elaine Rancourt, Roberta Kathleen Parks, and Brenda Carroll Ball on Taylor Mountain, a place Bundy frequently visited. Donna Gail Manson's remains were never found. The bodies were left at the scene naked, with no clothing or jewelry recovered, making it a challenging case for investigators to solve. Idaho, Utah, Colorado. In August 1974, Ted Bundy received a second acceptance letter from the University of Utah Law School, prompting his move to Salt Lake City. Diane Edwards, his previous partner, remained in Seattle as he embarked on this new chapter. While Bundy maintained contact with Edwards through phone calls, his social life took a darker turn as he began dating at least a dozen other women. However, Bundy's pursuit of legal studies in Salt Lake City took an unexpected and crushing turn. As he delved into the first-year law curriculum for the second time, he found himself disillusioned. He was deeply disheartened to discover that his fellow students possessed an intellectual capacity he believed he lacked. The coursework proved utterly incomprehensible to him, a profound disappointment that weighed heavily on his mind. The following month marked the inception of a new string of homicides, with 2 of them remaining undiscovered until Bundy finally confessed to his heinous deeds shortly before his impending execution. On September 2, 1974, Bundy brutally raped and strangled an unidentified hitchhiker in Idaho. The gruesome act was further compounded as he returned the next day to photograph and dismember the victim's lifeless body before disposing of the remains in a nearby river. Then, on October 2nd, he carried out another sinister abduction. This time, his victim was 16-year-old Nancy Wilcox in Holiday, Utah, a suburb of Salt Lake City. Bundy admitted that he encountered Wilcox while she was walking along a poorly lit road. He maneuvered his vehicle to a secluded orchard, forcibly restrained her, and took her back to his apartment. There, he allegedly held her captive for an agonizing 24 hours before ultimately strangling her to death. Bundy later disclosed the location where her remains were buried, near Capitol Reef National Park, approximately 200 miles south of Holiday, but despite extensive efforts, they were never recovered. On October 18th, Melissa Ann Smith, the 17-year-old daughter of the police chief of Mid-Valley, her lifeless, nude body was discovered in a nearby mountainous area 9 days later. The post-mortem examination revealed a harrowing possibility. She may have remained alive for up to 7 days following her disappearance. On October 31st, another 17-year-old Laura Ann Aime disappeared 25 miles south of Leahy. She had left a Halloween party alone just after midnight, and her last sighting was while she attempted to hitchhike. A group of hikers eventually found her naked body 9 miles northeast in American Fork Canyon on Thanksgiving Day. The medical examiner's estimate was grim. Laura had succumbed to death on November 20th, 20 days after her disappearance. Both Smith and Amy had endured brutal beatings, rape, sodomy, and were strangled with nylon stockings. In the late afternoon of November 8th, Bundy approached an 18-year-old telephone operator named Carol DeRanche at Fashion Place Mall in Murray, which was less than a mile away from the last known location of Melissa Smith. Impersonating an officer named Officer Roseland from the Murray Police Department, Bundy informed DeRanche that an attempt had been made to break into her car and requested her to accompany him to the station to file a complaint. As the situation grew increasingly suspicious, DeRanche astutely pointed out that they were not heading to the police station, leading to a chilling confrontation. Bundy swiftly pulled over and tried to handcuff her. In a stroke of luck, he accidentally fastened both cuffs to the same wrist, enabling DeRanche to escape through the car door. Later that same evening, Deborah Jean Kent, a 17-year-old student at Viewmont High School in Bountiful, went missing after leaving a school theater production to pick up her brother. The school's drama teacher and a student shared unsettling accounts of an unidentified stranger who had asked them to step outside to identify a car. Another student witnessed the same man pacing at the rear of the auditorium, while the drama teacher spotted him once again before the play's conclusion. Outside the auditorium, investigators discovered a key that unlocked the handcuffs taken from Doranch's wrist. Bundy eventually confessed to abducting Deborah Kent, revealing that she had been taken back to his residence and kept alive for a period. By November, Klopfer, Bundy's former partner, called King County Police for a second time, alarmed after reading about young women disappearing in the vicinity of Salt Lake City. Detective Randy Hergesheimer from the Major Crimes Division meticulously interviewed her. At that point, Bundy had significantly ascended the hierarchy of suspects in King County. Yet, the witness at Lake Sammamish, whom detectives regarded as highly reliable, failed to identify Bundy from a photo lineup. In December, Klopfer contacted the Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office and repeated her concerns. Although Bundy's name was added to the list of suspects, no credible forensic evidence tied him to the Utah crimes at that juncture. In January 1975, Bundy returned to Seattle after completing his final exams and spent a week with Klopfer. What he did not know was that she had reported him to the police on 3 separate occasions. Despite these events, she made plans to visit him in Salt Lake City later in August. During 1975, Bundy shifted a significant portion of his criminal activities eastward, relocating from his Utah base to Colorado. On January 12, 1975, Corinne Eileen Campbell, a 23-year-old registered nurse, mysteriously disappeared from the Wildwood Inn in Snowmass Village. A month later, her lifeless nude body was discovered near a dirt road adjacent to the resort. An autopsy revealed that she had been killed by brutal blows to her head from a blunt instrument, leaving distinctive linear groove depressions on her skull. Her assailant had also inflicted deep cuts on her body with a sharp weapon, and her left earlobe had been slit. Moving forward to March 15, 1975, in Vail, Colorado, ski instructor Julie Lyle Cunningham, 26 years old, went missing while walking from her apartment to meet a friend for dinner. Bundy later recounted that he approached Cunningham while using crutches as a ploy, asking her to assist him in carrying his ski boots to his car. Denise Lynn Oliverson, 25, disappeared while riding her bicycle toward her parents' house on April 6, 1975. Her bike and sandals were later found under a viaduct near a railroad bridge. Bundy admitted to abducting Oliverson and subsequently killing her in his car close to the Utah state line. He then discarded her body in the Colorado River, a claim supported by gas receipts that placed him in the city on the very day Oliverson vanished. On May 6, 1975, Bundy parked his car outside Alameda Junior High School in Pocatello, Idaho. He noticed 12-year-old Lynette Dawn Culver walking alone and lured her into his vehicle, driving her to his Holiday Inn hotel room. There, he sexually assaulted Culver and drowned her in the bathtub before disposing of her body in the Snake River north of Pocatello. Bundy's confession included intimate details about Lynette's personal life. In mid-May, 3 of Bundy's colleagues from Washington State DES, including Carol Ann Boone, visited him in Salt Lake City, staying at his apartment for a week. Shortly thereafter, Bundy spent a week in Seattle with his partner, Elizabeth Klopfer. During their time together, they discussed plans to get married the following Christmas. Remarkably, Klopfer never revealed her numerous discussions with authorities in both King County and Salt Lake County. Bundy concealed his relationships with both Boone and a law student from Utah, known by varying names in different accounts, such as Kim Andrews or Sharon Auer. On June 28, 1975, 15-year-old Susan Curtis disappeared from the campus of Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah. She was participating in the Bountiful Orchard Youth Conference and was last seen on the conference's first day, leaving her friends to walk back to her dormitory, which was approximately a quarter-mile away. Tragically, she never made it to her destination. Bundy confessed to Curtis's murder, and his confession was recorded just before he entered the execution chamber. The bodies of Wilcox, Kent, Cunningham, Oliverson, Culver, and Curtis were never recovered. Meanwhile, in Washington state, investigators grappled with solving the Pacific Northwest murder spree, which had come to a sudden and perplexing halt. To make sense of the overwhelming volume of data, they turned to an innovative approach, creating a database using the King County payroll computer. They input a plethora of lists they had compiled, including information about acquaintances of the victims, Volkswagen owners named Ted, known sex offenders, and more. The computer identified 26 names common to 4 different lists, with Bundy's name among them. Detectives manually created a list of their top 100 suspects, and Bundy's name appeared at the very top. It was at this point, with Bundy as a prime suspect, that word arrived from Utah regarding his arrest.